Okay, so the program goes ahead to say we should calculate or find the year, okay, with the greatest increase in population during the time period. So let's create a function for that. Function, let's call it get. So it's the greatest increase in population during the time period. So let's call it, it's a year, okay? So greatest increase in population year. Okay, it's a long name. Okay, so get greatest increase in population year. So figure out again if this function needs any argument so we can define parameters for it. Okay, so in order to get this year, okay, we need to first find the greatest increase in population. Okay, and we can find that in our population change data list, because this is the list that contains all our population change data. The highest value in that list is our population change. It's our highest population change data, right? Let's get that first. I mean, this function is going to get the year with the greatest increase in population. So getting the greatest increase in population is not what the question wants, but we can use that greatest population increase value to get the year. So let's first get the greatest increase in population. Okay, the highest increase in population. Let's get that. So we need this list. We need our population change data list. Okay, so I'm going to pass that population change data list to this function. I'm going to define a parameter for it, okay, with the same name. Again, it doesn't matter, these names are the same. Consider different because they're in two different functions. The scope of them, okay, these two values or these two names are different because they're in two different functions. So there is the max function, okay, max function, which takes in an argument and it's going to return the maximum. It's going to take in a list in this case, and it's going to return the maximum or the highest number in this list. Okay, so if I pass in the population change data list to this max function, it's going to return the highest population change increase, right? Something like that. So this is going to be our greatest increase in population. Okay, so this value here is going to be our greatest increase in population. Now this is not what we want. This is not what the question is asking, but at least we're getting there. We have this greatest increase in population. We can use this value to get the year with the greatest increase in population. All right, so the next thing I want us to do is to get the index of this greatest increase in population in this list. We want to get an index of it, right? If we have the index of it, we can work around with it to get the year. Okay, so the way I can get an index of it is by using the index function. There's an index function, right? But you have to refer to the list, okay, where you want to find the index of this value. So I'm referring to our population change data list. Population change data list dot index. So basically I'm saying give me the index of this greatest increase in population value in this population change data list. So the index function is going to return the index of this greatest increase in population value in this population change data list. When it's returning that value is going to be the greatest increase in population index. So I'm going to copy this name here. That value is going to be the greatest increase in population index, this way. Okay, that's still not what we want yet, but we're getting there. We have the greatest increase in population and we have the greatest increase in population index. We want to break this line somewhere around here. Type in a backslash and enter, and I'm going to separate this a little bit just so it makes sense. It's easily readable. Okay, so when we have the index, now we can actually do something with it to get the year, right? We know that the year, the range is from 1950 to 1990. So for the population data list, okay, the US population .txt or the population data list, the very first item or the very first population is the population for 1950. While in the list, okay, to access the very first item, it has an index of 0. Okay, so if it has an index of 0, think about it. If we add 0 to 1950, we get 1950. And 1950 is the year for this, right? The next value in this population data text file, or because we read the values in the list, or in our population data list, the second value here will have an index of 1. This value here represents the population for the year 1951. But think about it, the index is what? 1. This is the index 0, this is the index 1 in our list. If you add 1 to 1950, we get 1951. 1951 is the year for this particular value. So if we get the index, okay, we won't get the index of these values here, right? In this case, we are getting the indexes of our population change data list. Now, population change data list will also contain the population data for each year, right? We have this number of, we have this list here. Let's say there are 41 items here. In our population change data, we'll also have 41 items, each representing the population change data for each of the years. So we don't have the population change data list with us now, but in our population change data list, we'll have 41 items as well, or we'll have the population change data for each year. So if we get the highest increase, or the greatest increase in population index, right, then we can add the start year, which is 1950, to it and get the year. It's the same idea like I was explaining here. Same idea. If we have our population change data list, we get the index. Let's say the very first item in our population change data list. Let's say the very first item. Well, we know the very first item is 0, right? We know the very first item is 0. But let's say for some reason that first item was the highest or the greatest increase in population. The index of that first item is 0. That population change data represents the population change data for 1950. The index of that item is 0. If we take 0 and we add it to our 1950 value, or 1950, which is our start year, we get 1950. That 1950 represents the population change data. That value represents the change data for 1950. So basically, what I'm trying to explain is that if we get an index of our population change, if we get an index of our greatest increase in population, then we can add the start year, which is 1950, to get the year. The year for that population change data. So I'm going to just explain one more time. If we have a population change data list, okay, and let's say in our population change data list, now this is not our population change data list, this is our population change data, but in our population change data list, let's say the second item, okay, is the greatest increase in population. The index of that second item, okay, in our list will have an index of will be 1. Okay, that second item, if it happens to be our greatest increase in population, will have an index of 1. Okay, and that second item is really the population change data for 1951, which has an index of 1. So if we have an index of 1 and we add it to our 1950, our start year, we are going to get 1951. That's how we are going to figure out the year, basically. So all I'm saying is if we get the greatest increase in population index, we add the start year to it, which is 1950, to get the year. So I'm going to also modify this function to accept the start year. And so if we take our greatest increase in population index and we add the start year to it, right, we're going to end up getting, okay, the year, the actual year. And so this is going to be our greatest increase in population year. Okay, the greatest increase in population year, this variable is going to actually store the greatest increase in population year, right? I'm exceeding this line here, so I'm going to break it somewhere around here, type in a backslash and enter. So I'm doing this just so it's clear to all of us, all right? That's what I'm explaining, just to make sure it's clear. When we have our greatest increase in population year, then let's go ahead and return our greatest increase in population year. But I don't want to just return that. I want to return the greatest increase in population as well. Now in Python, you can return multiple values. The reason why I want to return it is because in our output, I want to say, okay, this year had the greatest increase in population with the population of this value, right? So I need not just the greatest increase in population year, I also want the greatest increase in population itself. So in Python, you can return multiple values. First value I'm returning is the greatest increase in population year. The second value I want to return is the greatest increase in population itself. So you can pass multiple arguments this way, separating them with a comma. And when you are receiving these values, you also have to have two variables that are going to receive these values respectively, okay, also separated with commas. And we see it when we are getting these values. So to get the smallest increase in population, okay, it's going to be the same idea. We're just going to change the names a little bit. So I'm going to make a copy of this function, paste it. This time we are not getting the greatest increase in population year, we are getting the smallest. Okay, the smallest increase in population, right? We're getting the smallest increase in population. We'll still need our population change data list. We're also going to modify it to take our start year. Okay. We're not getting the greatest increase in population. We are getting the smallest increase in population. We're not getting the maximum value in our population change data list. We're getting the minimum value. There's a min function, which returns the minimum value or the lowest value in a list you give it. We are getting the smallest increase in population index, not the greatest. In our population change data list, we want to get the index of the smallest increase in population, okay, not the greatest increase in population. And over here, we are taking our smallest increase in population index, okay, we are adding it to our start year, and that's going to be our smallest increase in population year. And then when we're done, we return the smallest increase in population year and our smallest increase in population. So that's going to be, it's very identical. We just need to change the names of it. All right, so let's see. I think we are done for the most part. But I want us to create a function that is going to display all the data for us. Okay, so I'm going to define a function. I'm going to call it print population data. All right, so this function, it's going to need all the arguments that we want to print, right? So the question here says that we should print the average annual change in population during the time period. All right, so we have a function that's going to actually give us the average annual change in population. It's going to return a value. It's going to return our average annual change in population. I'm actually going to use this name to create that parameters here as well. Again, like I said, it doesn't matter because these variables do not see each other. They are considered different because they are in or they are in separate functions. So the parameter, I'm going to call it average annual change in population. This function is going to take that value and print it for us. Also, it's going to need, because the question over here said we should print out the year with the greatest increase in population during the time period. So we need that. And we have a function returning that. So I'm going to create a parameter. I'm going to give it the same name as the greatest increase in population year. And I'm also going to create this function to accept the greatest increase in population itself, so that we can display that, okay, this year had the highest increase in population with a population of this value. All right. Same thing, I'm going to do the same thing for our smallest increase in population year. I'm going to pass it to this function. And also the smallest increase in population itself. All right, so I'm going to break this line somewhere around here. Type in a backslash, hit enter. Still exceeding the line, so I'm going to break it somewhere around here. Type in a backslash, hit enter. Still exceeding the line, I'm going to break it somewhere around here. Type in a backslash, hit enter. Still exceeding, break it somewhere around here, backslash, enter. Okay, we're still in our function. So what we want to do is call our print function to display this value for us. Print function, I'm going to print out the average annual change in population during the time. Let's just say the average annual change in population. Okay, so this is going to be a string. I'm going to say the average annual change in population is. So this is one entire argument. Okay, I'm going to concatenate it with our average annual change in population. All right, I'm going to concatenate with our average annual change in population. So let's say is, but the thing is, our average annual change in population contains a number. When you try to concatenate a value, a number here to our string here, we're going to get an error. Python is going to complain and say that we can't do that. We need to make sure that this value is a string. So I'm going to concatenate this string to the string version of average annual change in population. So I'm going to call the str function, which is going to convert whatever you pass to it as a string. So I'm going to concatenate it with a string version of the string version of this average annual change in population variable. I'm going to say the average annual change in population is this, and this is my first argument, so I'm going to type in a comma to type in the next argument. Okay, so I'm going to break this line somewhere around here because I'm exceeding, backslash hit enter. I'm exceeding that line here. So after the comma is my next argument. Next argument is going to be the year with the greatest increase in population. Okay, so that's also going to be a string, but I know I'm going to exceed it already, so I'm going to break the line already here. Type in a backslash hit enter. So as a string, I'm going to paste the year with the greatest increase in population is, and I'm going to concatenate it with the greatest increase in population year. That's also a number, so I'm going to concatenate it with a string version of that number. But I'm not done with this argument. I'm going to say the year with the greatest increase in population is, let's say, this year. I'm going to concatenate it with a string and say with the population of, and I'm going to concatenate it with the greatest increase in population. That's a number, so I'm going to concatenate it with a string version of that. All right, I'm done with this argument, and I'm going to type in a comma, okay, so that we provide the next argument. But I want to break this line into two, so somewhere around here I'm going to type in the backslash hit enter. Still exceeding the line, so somewhere around here type in the backslash hit enter. All right, so I have a comma, and then now I'm going to type in the next argument. I know I'm going to exceed this line, so I'm going to break it somewhere around here. Type in the backslash hit enter. Okay, next argument is going to be the year with the smallest increase in population. Let's do that. So in our double quotation as a string, I'm going to say the year with the smallest increase in population is, and I'm going to concatenate it with the smallest increase in population year. It's a number, so I'm going to concatenate it to the string version of that. And then I'm going to say the year with the smallest increase in population is this year, okay, with a population of, and I'm going to concatenate it to the smallest increase in population variable. It's a number, so I'm going to concatenate it to the string version of it here. All right, so I'm going to break it somewhere around here, type in the backslash hit enter. Break it somewhere around here, type in the backslash hit enter. And I'm done with this argument as well. So this entire value here is one argument. This entire value here all the way to the comma is one argument, okay? And we have our comma. This entire argument here all the way to the comma here is another argument, all the way to the comma. And then this is our third argument all the way here, okay, to the closing parentheses of the print function. Now, when you pass an argument to the print function this way, by default, you are printed with a space separating them, okay? But I don't want to print these values horizontally on one line with a space separating them. I want to change the default separator, okay? By default, when you pass arguments to the print function, they are printed with a space separating them. I want to change that separator from a space, okay, to a new line character. All I'm saying is print out an argument and then separate it with a new line. And then print out the next argument, separate it with a new line. I want these values or these arguments to be printed, okay, vertically and not horizontally. So you can change that default separator from a space to a new line character. So I'm going to type in as an argument, that's why I typed in a comma here. So as an argument, I'm going to type in the SEP. Okay, I'm going to change the SEP value. Okay, I'm going to set it equal to, change the separator. Okay, SEP stands for separator, from a default space to a new line character. The backslash n together is a new line character. There's an escape sequence backslash n together with the new line character. What it's going to do now is it's, instead of separating each argument with a space, when they are printed, it's going to print an argument and then separate it with a new line. What it means is it's going to print that argument and then move the position from the end of that line to the next line. And anything that comes after what you just printed before is going to be printed from the next line going. And then that is also going to be separated with a new line. It's going to move the position from the end of that line to the next line. And anything that follows what you just printed before is going to be displayed from the next line going. Okay, so let's change the default separator from a space to a new line character. This is exceeding this line. I'm going to break it somewhere around here, type in a backslash, hit enter. Okay, so we're done with what we want to print. All right, so let's create our main function. Okay, now in the main function is basically, in most programming languages, the main function is where your program is. It's the function that calls every other function. So it's good practice. It's actually recommended that you actually create a function. You should have a main function where your program is, where it calls every other function. So let's define a main function. In the main function, let's think about what we want to do first. We have all our functions here. The first thing we want to do is read our population data from the file to the list. So in our main function, I'm going to call that function. And we know that this function, this read population data from file to list function, takes in a file name. And so right above it, I'm going to create a variable called file name. Again, it doesn't matter you're using the same names. It does not matter at all because they are in different functions. So the scope of this variable, for example, is within the main function. The scope of this file name parameter is within this function. So I'm going to create a file name here, and the file name is going to be, according to the question, uspopulation.txt. That's what we named our file, uspopulation.txt. So I'm going to paste it here, and then let me just space this out a little bit so it's clear. I'm going to pass in the file name to this function. We know that it needs that file name, and we know this read population data from file to list function returns the population data list. So when it's returning the population data list, okay, I'm going to make a copy of the name. When it's returning the population data list, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to create a variable and call it the same name as what it's returning, as the parameter name we defined in the function. I'm going to create a variable called a population change data list. This population change data list variable is going to store whatever list this read population data from file to list function is returning. It doesn't matter, the names are the same. The scope of this population data variable is within the read population data from file to list function, and then the scope of this population data list is within our main function. Okay, so now we have our population data list. So the next thing we want to do is to calculate our population change basically, right? So let's call that function. In our main function, the next function we call is calculate population change. This calculate population change, we know that it takes in a population data list, okay? Population data list. And we have that population data list here. So I'm going to copy that list, the name, and then pass in that list to it. We know that our calculate population change function returns a population change data list. I'm going to copy the name. And so if it's returning a population change data list, then we need a variable to store that. And so I'm going to create a variable, call it population change data list. It's the same name as what we have over here. Okay, same name as what we have over here. Doesn't matter. These variables are considered different because they are in two different functions. Okay, so we have our population change data list now. The next thing we want to do is to call our calculate average annual change in population. And so I'm going to make a copy of that function and then call it here. So I'm going to, hold on one second. I'm going to call that function. We know this function takes in our population change data list. So we have here population change data list. So I'm going to pass it to this function. And we know that our calculate average annual change in population function returns our average annual change in population. And so when it's returning our average annual change in population, hold on one second. I'm going to make a copy of the name. When it's returning our average annual change in population, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to create a variable with that same name, average annual change in population, which is going to store whatever average annual change in population value this function is returning. All right, so exceeding this line, I'm going to break it somewhere around here, type in the backslash, hit enter. Okay. All right, so we have our average annual change in population. The next value we want to get is our year. So get greatest increase in population year. Okay, so I'm going to call that function here. Get greatest increase in population year. This needs, okay, sorry, right here. This needs our population change data list, okay, which we have here. So I'm going to pass it to this get greatest increase in population year function. And it also needs over here our start year. We don't have that yet, so we know our start year from the question is 1950. The question said the first line in the file contains the population for 1950. Okay, and it's from the years, it's during the years 1950 all the way to 1990. We just need 1950 as our start year. So over here I'm going to create as a named constant the start year. Okay, start underscore year, and I'm going to set it to 1950. Okay, so by popular convention, when you're naming your constant, you want to make sure they're all uppercase, and if it's more than one word, you want to separate them with an underscore. And so I'm going to pass in the start here to this get greatest increase in population because it needs our population change data list and our start here. And we've given it here, our population change data list and our start here. Now we know that this get greatest increase in population function returns two things. It returns the greatest increase in population for greatest increase in population year, and it also returns the greatest increase in population. So it's returning two items, right? So we need two variables to also receive those arguments, receive those values respectively. I'm going to call those variables the same name. So get greatest increase in population. The first argument is the first value it's returning is our greatest increase in population year. I'm going to create a variable with the same name to receive that value. And the second argument is the greatest increase in population itself. So I'm going to create a variable with the same name. I'm going to type a comma first, type in a variable with the same name, and that's going to receive it. Okay, so because it's returning this as the first value, it's returning the greatest increase in population year as the first value. I created a variable called greatest increase in population year to receive that value, and then a comma because it's returning another second value, which is our greatest increase in population. Our greatest increase in population itself. All right, I created a variable, okay, with the same name. It doesn't have to be the same name, but I'm naming ours the same name just so it's consistent. So I'm storing that as well here. Okay, so separate those with commas as well. I'm exceeding this line, so I'm going to break this line into two. Type in a backslash, hit enter. Still exceeding the line here, so I'm going to break it into two somewhere around here. Type in a backslash, hit enter. Okay, and then now we need to get smallest increase in population, so I'm going to call that function. So get smallest increase in population. It needs the population change data list, right, which we have here. And it also needs our start here, okay, which we have as a name constant here. So I'm going to make a copy of that, pass it into it. So the get smallest increase in population function returns also the smallest increase in population year and then the smallest increase in population. First is returning the smallest increase in population year. So I'm going to create a variable with that same name. Smallest increase in population year. Okay. And then I'm going to create a variable with called the smallest. Basically, I'm going to name it the smallest increase in population, same name, because that's the second value it's returning. And these two variables will store those two values that are being returned, respectively. The first value is returning the smallest increase in population, and the second value it's returning is our smallest increase in. The first value is returning. Okay, it's our smallest increase in population year. Okay, this value, and then the second value is returning is our smallest increase in population. So I have a smallest increase in population variable to receive it. Again, it doesn't matter, these names are the same. The scope of these variables, okay, are within the main function. The scope of this value, these values, for example, are within our get smallest increase in population year. They are considered different variables because they are in two different functions. Okay. All right. I just want to point out that just so it's not confusing. Okay. All right. So I'm going to break this line into two. So type in the backslash here, hit enter. still exceeding it, so I'm going to break it somewhere around here, type in a backslash and enter.